Good evening, good afternoon, almost evening, everyone. So I'll start this panel giving a presentation, sharing some thoughts about what you're calling the demusealization, the idea of demusealization of the museum, which is a concept that we are grappling together. That my own research in my PhD dissertation about the musealization of the museum space and the sharing of these images on social media, and also it's a common approach of the Giselle, Bruno, and Rafael Pagatini artistic research practice. So a possible definition of musealization is an operation of trying to extract physically or conceptually something from its natural or cultural environment and giving it a museal status. I'm quoting André Devalet and François Marais in Key Concepts of Museology. They also clarified how the act of musealization leads the museum away from being a temple to make it part of a process which brings it closer to a laboratory. So from this idea, I'm using the notion of musealization for three different moments. The first one is originated in the memory studies discussion in the 80s, when we started to hear about the musealization of daily life as part of the debate about the memory boom and the archive fever. The second one is what I'm calling the musealization of the museum, which started to happen mostly since 2012, more or less, when most museums started to allow visitors to photograph inside the galleries. And the third moment would be what we are calling the demusealization of the museum. And I'm choosing this temporal mark in 2016, basically because it's correlated to other recent events, such as the creation of some movements such as Colonize This Place, which help to bring this debate to a wider audience. And one of the reasons is to the repercussion on social media. In this debate about the memory boom in the 80s, Andreas Hewson is one of the authors who devotes special attention to the protagonist of the museum, which was actually an opposite movement concerning the battle against this space assumed by the avant-garde movement in the early of the 20th century, and again in the 60s. And this is perhaps still one that's very symbolic images of our archive fever in the recent decades. This work by Eric Kessel's 24 Hours in Photos. It was presented right in several occasions in which he materialized the total number of photos published in a single day on platforms such as Flickr, Facebook, and Google Images. A recent version was shown recently in the exhibition Send Me an Image in the CO Berlin, occupying the hall of the museum with 350,000 photos posted on Flickr 50 years ago. But he chose to remake the installation by downloading the images from the networks of the present time. It would be difficult to find a suitable space. How many more square meters would it take to stock some 90 million printed downloads, the approximate number of images posted daily on Instagram in December last year. But actually this work is translating another moment in what some authors such as Andrew Hoskins calls the third memory boom, which is different from the documentary overdose of previous decades basically because this characteristic that everyone is producing, transmitting their own memories in real time and in involuntary way, creating this process of a technological unconscious in which invisible operations of such software and algorithms are also playing an important role. In other words, the problem is no longer just the obsession with archiving, but the difficulty to understanding when and how and for whom we are producing memories. So if the musealization of everyday life is one of the consequences of the memory culture, it is interesting to think about what happens when this space also becomes a target of such practice, when visitors started to photograph the artworks and post these images online, they also assume a new role in musealizing the museum itself. The word museum is mentioned around in a hashtag with this word 23 million times in a search on Instagram. Mm-hmm. In a moment when the definition of what a museum is and its role is in question, it doesn't seem possible to arrive to a clear answer by looking at such diverse sets. At first glance, the only thing that we can conclude is that the definition of museum on Instagram visual culture is getting closer to every dimension of life, from fitness to soccer. And a second step after this musealization of the museum would be how these images are shared on platforms such as Instagram, becoming kind of a digital personal collection or counter collection. This term was used to describe an emergent archive and musealization beyond the academia and outside the institutional tradition of memorization practice. And it is used by researchers such as Cícero Inácio da Silva as a response to a long and historical process of formalization, a counter methodology. This is an example of some hashtags mapping people on social, on museum space, which are several kind of different keywords to find this material, or at the same time that to research the same material on museums is not sometimes easier because museums don't have a particular category to organize images of visitors, which is sometimes problematic because I'm trying to collect this material and it's very dispersed. And among this counter collection created by the audience, I'm grouping some images that correspond to the idea about the demusealization of the museums, because museums are on spotlight very much in this moment when the emergence of the debate about the colonial reparation follow how audiences responding to this process in digital platforms, certainly a topic time. Here, these two visitors, for instance, are refusing to look at the artworks, which is already an interesting manifesto against the site-centered regime of experience in museums. And both are using elements of the museum space to perform for the camera. But there are deeper messages behind that which could be seen as funny picture. They're also questioning the lack of representation of some bodies and identities in the museum imaginary. So the process of demusealizing the museum certainly has gained more popularity in the last few years with the rise of groups such as the Colonized Displaced in 2016. The main members are Palestinian American Amin Hussein and the Indian American Natasha Dishlam, which besides being activists are also artists and academics. And in an article written in 2018 for the October magazine, they contextualize their actions among one of the phases of the institutional critique, pointing as a difference the fact that they use more social movement tactics, seeking dialogues with other sectors of society. And because I have these origins in the Occupy movement in 2011, when it started as a part of the Occupy Museums, which was the beginning kind of activism on social networks. The use of these platforms are also very central in this in their actions. Just doing a short retrospective of this recent event, and 2020 was also a central year to this debate, especially due to the scope of the Black Lives Matter protests, which was the largest in the history of the United States, and in parallel, combined with the urban follies movement. And both movements also had an impact on the growth of the debate of the museum decolonization, especially in the case of ethnological and natural history museums with collections that have their origins in colonial process. And so this is just to introduce a topic about the Humboldt Forum, which is a case study that I'm working on in my PhD thesis. And considering all these recent episodes, that could not have been a more troubled historical moment for a museum like Humboldt Forum to open, and as it was last year after years of delay. And since it started to be planned, it has been accused of being rooted on conservative ideas that goes against what is understood as a modern Germany, and especially due to the reconstruction of the Berlin Palace, bringing back a nostalgia of the Prussian imperialism. And as a way, well, besides that, the institution also incorporates the so-called non-Western arts, such as the Berlin Asian Arts Museum, Ethnological Museum, and the Humboldt University Scientific Collection. And as you know, there are several controversies concerning provenance and cultural appropriation in this collection. And as a way to respond to this controversy, the Humboldt Forum have appropriated post-colonial critique as a strategic reflexivity, to use a definition by Friedrich von Boos. And it's an interesting case study of a museum that was open while demusealizing itself, using the logo decolonized as a brand in its publicity material. And this was an artistic research collaboration between the artist Ted Etler with the Humboldt Lab as part of the Making Difference project. This is something that we can discuss later in the roundtable, because it's also dealing with ethics a lot. Actually, the artists created an art installation for the exhibition After Nature that asks visitors and professional communities to consider the ethical implication of exhibiting human remains that belongs to museums and university collection. And basically they decided not to exhibit the skull, but they created a discussion about why do not exhibit. But interestingly, they use the images of the skull and the museum publicity material on the website. And I'm also reproducing here, yeah. In my research, I'm basically doing a comparative analysis between the hashtag Humboldt Forum on Instagram and the museum official account. I'm looking for points of convergence and difference between demusealization practice carried out by the audience and by the institution itself. Also trying to identify new taxonomies about the museum and the collective memory created. I'm interested to discuss how the remediation of the museum and through images could be used in different ways, and sometimes opposite ways, either to reinforce a traditional socially constructed imaginary about this space, either to dismantle. And just, I'm not going further on this, but just to say that I use a similar methodology in this other research about the National Museum in Rio de Janeiro, which is part of a chapter that I also, for a book that I also wrote with Giselle Beiguelman. And it addressed the emergence of an involuntary memorial to the Rio de Janeiro National Museum on Instagram since the fire that happened in 2018 and destroyed around 46% of its collection. And so during 1 year, we analyzed approximated 1,700 posts, 1,000 posts which use the hashtag Museu Nacional Vive, which means Museu Nacional It's Alive, trying to identify patterns among these images that could be conceptualized as a memorial, like an involuntary memorial created by people concerning the lack of politics for memory preservation and the discussion and that is very particular in Brazil and Latin America. And so, yeah, the idea to approximate the Humboldt Forum, I also create this, I tried to create some, using images of both museums. I create an Instagram account, trying to find some points in common of the both institutions have an origin in imperial, have an imperial past in this origins. But yeah, I think this would be too much time specific. I can comment about this later on the ethics on the round table. And just to show a little bit of these categories again about the Humboldt Forum, one of these categories that I'm creating is just using like the idea of collective writing, comparing the hashtags with the with some manifestations that people are doing with graffitis in this space, basically combining opposite discourse. This on the left was an old images that I found from, I think just for when it was announced that the palace would be reconstructed, and actually celebrating that the palace would be reconstructed again, combining with this recent protests asking its destruction. So yeah, I'm just going to show some of them, but not. This is also another category, which is related with this also, again, this idea of demusealizing the museum space using body visuality and the performative gaze, and which also the museum is using this a lot by inviting performance and dance exhibition in the museum. So it is from different approach by the audience and the museum. This is something that is kind of a trend at the moment. And yeah, so, and just to conclude, I just would like to say that the idea of the demusealization of the museum reverberates a current discussion about what many people are calling the post-museum, especially regarding ethnological museum. And as we see in these recent publications, the topic about the future of the museum is quite popular now, especially after or still in the pandemic. But what I think that more than a post-museum would suggest an idea of overcoming this concept. We are more interested in thinking about the notion of after museums, looking at other stages in which musealization process keep happening, such as that's images and circulation on social media and on public space. And yeah, to conclude, I just would like to go back to the initial point about these three phases of musealization, adding two questions. One is how museums could learn with this counter methodology developed by the audience and assimilate this practice in their own institutional methods. And the second one would be how the audience itself can apply this demusealization practice in their own life. Actually, I mean, to be more conscious about the way we use social media as a platform, as archive, in a more attentive and critical way, which basically is related also to digital literacy, and how can this process be less unconscious and more, critical. Yeah, then I think that's it. I will finish and then thank you. I'll let the time for the other presenters to keep and then we can discuss this more later.
And hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you all. I don't know if Nathalia needs to stop the sharing. I can start sharing my screen. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. Thanks, Nathalia, Bruno, and Giselle. It's a pleasure to be here. Several artists, by understanding the museum as a space of conflict, have claimed to their practice new policies of operation as well as funding for cultural institutions. In this sense, they seek to rethink the structures and institutional policies of the museum in relation to its past. Here, I include my own contribution. I have been developing since 2014 an investigation of how the memory of civil military dictatorship from 1964 to 1985 in Brazil reverberates in Brazilian present in cultural space, and how many of the stories of the period are still silenced. I analyzed how cultural space suffered directly or indirectly with the problems and contradictions of producing culture in times of state of exception. Thus, I chose, among other institutions, the Pinacoteca do Estado de São Paulo, because it is a public museum influential in locating the country's richest state. In addition, São Paulo lived throughout 1970s and 1980s the process of consolidating its economic hegemony as cultural hegemony. Here, I present my research at the Pinacoteca do Estado de São Paulo and how I approach the museum's collection give the possibility of online carrying. The investigation is one of the most important, the institution is one of the most important art museums in Brazil. It is the oldest art museum in São Paulo, founded in 1905. Besides being such a relevant cultural institution, the focus on the Pinacoteca is due to the annex building, called Pina Estação, former building of the DOPS SP, Department of Political and Social Order, was the political police that persecuted, tortured, and killed opponents during the dictatorship. Although most of the Pinacoteca's archives are not digitalized, I began my research consulting the online database. The museum provides us access to the information through the website of their documentation and memory center. To a long search for keywords in cross-referencing, I found the indication of files that were part of a box from the Gestão de Acervos Culturais, Management of Cultural Archives, in which there was a mention from 1973 to the former dictator Emílio Garrastazu Médici. This search on the online database alone carried the conductor with a sizable number of keywords and time frames. However, although the set of files was found, the material was not digitalized. That was when I went to Pinacoteca to have the access to the archives. Documentation indicates that a visit by the dictator took place on the occasion of the museum's reopening after a period closed for renovation. During the visit, Médici would have been especially interested in the painting Fim de Romance by the early 20th century artist Antônio Parreiras. The painting caught the general attention in 1973. Walter Ney, who was the director of the museum, hired a painter to make a copy with the aim of offering it to the general. In the files, I found there are documents referring to the whole process. The expansion of bidding, commitment, hiring, and payment, including the curriculum vitae of the painter who produced the copy. It draws attention to the fact that during the period of persecution of opponents of the regime, the painting was executed by a black painter, Otávio Ferreira de Araújo, who was trained in Moscow as an expert in socialist realism. It is worthwhile to speculate what would have caught the military man's attention. The dead man in typical costume of Médici region, would it have led him to find an affinity between the painting in his personal history a year before he left the government? In any case, the choice of painting is curious, to say the least, considering that it was during his government that dozens of opponents were killed and tortured. The general's sensibility seems to reflect the deceased during his government, many of whom passed through the DOPS headquarters, today an exhibition space of the Pinacoteca do Estado de São Paulo. The Pinacoteca, as an important institution administered by the state of São Paulo, is established as a cultural space brewed in army green barrels. Médici enthusiasm for the painting and the contradictions inherent in this process of producing a copy demonstrate how the cultural space was constituted as a relation space between the agents that administered the dictatorship. This investigation also consulted the catalog file of Finge Romancy, which did not indicate the presence of the copy given as a gift to the general. After my visit, information about the existence of the documents, as well as the copy, was included in the catalog files of Parreira's work. Here, we have an important move in the institutional infrastructure of the Pinacoteca's collection. The gesture of including this information in the catalog file adds to Parreira's work and to the institution's collections new path, analysis, and disputes. Based on this research in the archives, I also developed a set of work as part of the investigation process, which starts by photographing the painting, taking advantage of the fact that the work was on display. I photographed the painting with macro lens, allowing the observation of details of the brush strokes, cracks, and fissures. These photographs serve as a basis for the formalization of the work. Thus, based on the Parreira's brush strokes and the fragments that make up the image, it would be possible to observe the painting's dormant memory, which can be read differently from the documents. The photographs were digitally edited on the computer to create a regular grid that was manually engraved into the wood. The choice of wood plates observed the constructions of the fibers and the design of the texture they create in the print. This noise brought to the printing image the contrast between the rigidity of the engraved line and the expressiveness of the wood. The process of reproducing the image based on a painting has been widely used in the history of art, including by photographed processes. Here, one can think how digitalization affects the communication and practice of the museum, even considering the still limited access to the institution's archives. The still act of starting an ordinary online carry enable me to build more discursive layers about specific work present in the institution collection. Therefore, it seems momentous for the institutions to make the most of digital technology implementation and wield it to enhance transparency policies and public access to all the information that derives the museum existence. In the sense, digitalization, or the so-called deep mediatization, can contribute to a deeper transformation of the practice of access to information, critical analysis of the museum's history, its collection, and communication. The developed work brings more question than answer on how the culture, despite creative visuals about the dramas of the dictatorship, build the relationships that still linger obscure with authoritarian governments. Based on this research, I question how much this proximity contributes to create a sense of institutional normality in Brazil during the dictatorship, marked by violence and torture, or if it was structured as a survival strategy for a fragile art system reliant on the state, a debate that remains ignited in the challenging country in contemporary times. By accessing the information structure regarding the history and memory of the institution through the consolidation of files and other material available online, this data is a structuring part of the museum and can even contribute to new discursive layers about the artwork in the collection and the cultural space itself. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I will share my screen here. Just a moment. Is it okay? Everybody can see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my presentation here will be with Giselle Beiguelman. I will start and then she will continue. We'll change the positions during the presentation. So here we want, I and Giselle, we want to present a specific project. It's a project, Decomposite Collections. And it is a project that thinks about how museums and their collection can use technology and artificial intelligence from no commercial logics beyond the discourse imposed by big techs. So the Composite Collection is an ongoing investigation into the formation and updates of the colonialism gaze in museum collections. It's developed in the context of the Intelligence Museum residency in ZKM Museum. And the starting point is two art collections organized in the first half of the 20th century in São Paulo, Brazil. And so the team for this project is composed of 3 researchers: Giselle Beiguelman, she's an artist and professor at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism at the University of São Paulo; myself, Bruno Moreschi, artist and postdoctoral fellow at the same faculty; and Bernardo Fontes, creative programmers at the Group on Artificial Intelligence and Art, Gaia, also at the University of São Paulo. Our main questions in this project are, so first, what other art histories might emerge from AI's readings? Then also, how to elaborate methodologies based on AI to map the elements of the representations of historical colonialism. And also, can AI systems contribute to understand the gaze as a historical construct? So to answer these questions, we analyze the collections of 2 important Brazilian museums, both from the University of São Paulo. The first one, the Paulista Museum, it's a historical museum, and the second one is the Contemporary Art Museum, MAC USP. So Paulista Museum, it was founded in 1995 as a natural historical museum, and which became a historical museum in the context of the commemorations of the first centenary of Brazil independence in 1922. So today, the institution has a collection of over 450,000 items, and its collection is essential for understanding the construction of our colonialism imaginary in the official Brazilian historiography. And the other museum is the Museum of Contemporary Art, MAC USP. It was created in 1963 when the University of São Paulo received the collection of the Museum of Modern Art of São Paulo. And it is installed in an architectural complex created in the 50s by the architect Oscar Niemeyer and his team. And the collection of the museum is around 10,000 works, including paintings, 3D photographies, conceptual art, objects, and installation. Our focus was artworks produced between 1920 to 1950. This is the period related to the constitution of modernism, often described as the first counter-hegemonic aesthetic in Latin America. And then following this, following the post-colonial studies which have been questioning this approach, we decided to confront both collections by compiling a series of data sets organized according to some recurrent themes and in historical painting and Brazilian modernism. So indigenous people, people of color, white people, and tropical nature. Giselle, please.
Thank you, Bruno. First of all, I apologize. I'm recovering from COVID, so I'm a little bit slow, and sorry for my voice too. Continuing what Bruno is presenting, I should stress that our research process began as a kind of pedagogic experiment. It was and it is the Demonumenta project. It began in the context of the coronavirus pandemic with 70 students from the Faculty of Architecture, Urbanism and Design of the University of São Paulo. Basically, Demonumenta investigates the coloniality embedded in public institutions, monuments, and museum collections. And for this research, we organized our own network of people to do the tagging process for the AI experimentation. The decision-making process from the categorization to the tagging was collective. This is very important to stress, because the students were able to exchange knowledge and information, questioning and rethinking choices through this process, contradicting in some ways the precarious mode of machine learning in the AI field that, as you all know, usually is based on remote workers provided by services such as Amazon Mechanical Turk platform. The last thing I would like to stress that our focus was artworks produced between the 20s and the 50s, because this period is related to the constitution of modernism, which is, as Bruno already said, often described as the first counter-hegemonic aesthetic in Latin America.
Yes, so continue.
Continue, Bruno, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Giselle. So to create our data sets that Giselle is explaining, we jointly and critically choose 50 categories to tag the museum's artworks. And for them, we define our final categories. It's sky, fauna, flora, Black people, white people, and indigenous people. And those categories correspond to confluent actions present in the Brazilian historical painting and in Brazilian modernist approach. So here I will change some of our results with AI. Following the post-colonial thought studies, we decided to close both collections by compiling these data sets and then create some images using a model of algorithms that the name is GANs. And this choice of specific categories allowed us to deconstruct some basic assumptions of art historiography, which usually has its point of departure based on styles, for example, modern, contemporary, classic, etc., typologies, painting, sculpture, installations, etc., and authorships. By identifying the same categories in the collection of an historical museum, the Paulista Museum, and in the Museum of Contemporary Art, MAC-USP, it was also possible, based on the critical use of AI, to comprehend these continuities and discontinuities behind the models of artistic representations. That choice also lead our tagging too often. So this is not important. I think, Giselle, you can continue, please.
Okay, from these experimentations with GANs, those data, the data sets that we built allowed us to identify some common elements and differences between the Paulista Museum collection, this historical collection, and the Museum of Contemporary Art collection, despite the authorships or typologies of traditional art history. Through machine learning techniques, we could understand the persistence of the colonial imagination in the artworks, contradicting some canonical statements about Brazilian modernism, aesthetic and ideological ruptures. And these continuities range from the nude black male body, usually associated with plantation and slavery work, the patriarchal features of the white man, usually portrayed alone and with formal clothes, to indigenous people portrayed as generic entities without any particular characteristics. This is really something amazing, how it appears in the images we processed with guns, the way how the indigenous group has no differences between men, women, children, old, young people. So this also repeats, also there are changes, and they are evident in the figuration of white women, while historical painting focuses exclusively on their faces. In the modern painting, we see it emphasizes the woman's body. However, it's always understood from a misogynist point of view, emphasizing the woman breast and belly, elements directed that are related to motherhood. In what concern to women or Black women, the stereotype of the sensual slave is dominant in the collections we analyzed.
Okay, so because AI technologies read images by images, they can reveal hidden patterns in the iconography sets, including paintings, engravings, and drawings, going beyond traditional categories based on historical narratives and formal style. So the images we present here are the results of our ongoing investigation. They reflect how artificial intelligence understood the thematic axis of our analysis, revealing layers of meaning that traditional classification and organization approaches in the field of art history are not capable of evaluating. In this way, the composite collection proposes an artistic methodology that works as a counter-hegemonic performance. Our project also indicates how the practices of categorizing things and looking from a distance is structural for the colonial project, are related to AI practices. Michel Foucault wrote that taxonomy is not only a technology for giving names of things, but a methodology that supposes a certain continuum of things. And we believe that these images created in the composite collection show precisely this continuation. Kate Crawford also reminds us that this classificatory continuum of taxonomy is not just a movement in itself, but it is an instrument of power. So our experimentations shows that using AI researchers can contribute to critical analyze that traditional methodology in art history are not capable of evaluating. At the same time, these same images synthesized with neural networks review their limits for dealing with social otherness and the diversity intrinsic to individual creative procedures. Because of GAN's dependency on existing patterns, the training process points to generic visions and tend to reproduce the stereotypes of the colonial imaginary reframed by digital technologies.
I think that we are on time to close, so I would stress that from this perspective, the Composite Collection Project operates in an intermediary field between historical colonialism and the emerging data colonialism. AI and its uses in computer vision are imbricated and embed many colonial projects underway since the 18th century, which includes statistical process, pattern decisions based on patterns, and the division of the colonial territories. So from machinic eugenics from one side and contemporary post-colonial thinking from another drove us in this project, not as a counterpoint between nature and culture, but in the direction that artificial intelligence opens up to thinking about kind of a next nature, less anthropocentric and normative. I think that we can close now, Bruno.
Yes, thank you very much for everything. And this project, we are also, as I said at the beginning, we are doing an installation of some of the results in the exhibition at ZKM, Biomedia exhibition. And the exhibition is open until August of this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.